Israel has invaded Syria, and Syria said, quote, "This is a straight-up violation of our borders." But Israel didn't care. They said, quote, "We are doing this for our security and the security of Israel." And you need to know that Israel believes that they're allowed to do this because of something that happened just a few months ago. When the former Syrian president Assad was overthrown a few months ago, Israel said that the peace deal he signed disappeared along with it. And that peace deal was signed back in 1974, and to be fair, it's kind of held all the way up to today until Israel invaded Syria today. Now you should know the reason I say that is because this isn't the first time Israel has invaded Syria. They've done this dozens of times, and they've carried out thousands of airstrikes in just the last 2 years. But what's happened today is something a lot bigger than that. In those times, they've just built military checkpoints across roads. But today, as Israel has moved further into Syria, they've now built a military base. They're disguising it as a military checkpoint, but to be fair, it looks like a military base. Israel says that this is just a checkpoint across a road to make sure that nobody bad gets into Israel, but it doesn't look like that. As I said, this checkpoint appears to be a lot bigger than a normal blocking across a road, and it looks like Israel is really building up their military presence there. Syria has called this a complete invasion of Syria and a violation of their sovereignty, as you'd expect, but it seems that Israel doesn't care. And really, I wouldn't rule out Israel trying to control this Syrian land and possibly make it their own. But really, this isn't the biggest thing that's happening at the moment. Russia, for example, just said, quote, "We are going to take reciprocal measures and start testing our nuclear weapons." And this is really quite a big deal. This comes in response, if you don't know, to the US saying they're going to start testing nuclear weapons. But you need to know that Putin today said, quote, "I have instructed the Foreign Ministry, the Defense Ministry, the Special Services, and the corresponding civilian agencies to gather information on this matter." Then he said, quote, "Then we will submit proposals on the first steps of preparations for nuclear weapons tests." So Russia is serious about this. If the US starts testing nuclear weapons, then Russia will do it immediately. Now, Russia hasn't tested a nuclear weapon since 1991, before the fall of the Soviet Union, so this would be a huge deal. But the Russian defense minister said, quote, "America's actions have significantly raised the level of military threat to Russia." But you should know that the reason the US has said they're going to start testing nuclear weapons is actually because they've accused Russia of doing the same thing. Now, Russia completely denied that, but the US said they're still going to do it either way. And if the US does it, then Russia's going to do it. And really, this will be the start of the next Cold War. But it's not just the US who is now teaming up on Russia. Today, Bulgaria and Poland have basically told Russia to fuck off as well. Bulgaria announced they're going to seize a Russian oil refinery in their country. And this comes at the same time that Poland has started to completely cut off all Russian oil that flows through their country and replace it with, you guessed it, American oil. Bulgaria said, quote, "Seizing this oil refinery will prevent a supply crisis, and it will mitigate the risk of future or secondary sanctions on us." And you need to know that Poland said something similar, and it really seems like this is going to annoy Russia and make them lose out on billions and billions of dollars a year. Poland said, quote, "We are now working with the US to get American oil to boost the energy security of our region." Now, as I said, it goes without saying, this is really going to annoy Russia, and they're going to lose out on billions of dollars a year. This oil that flows through Poland makes Russia billions of dollars every year, and this oil refinery in Bulgaria, which Bulgaria is now seizing, also makes Russia billions of dollars a year. So to be fair, these Western sanctions are kind of working now, and Europe is really starting to cut off Russia. But I don't want to pretend like Europe is doing amazing. For example, today, the UK has been more embarrassed than really we've ever seen before. Today, the UK received 50 military vehicles, and it looks great. The problem is, though, that they've arrived 8 years late now. But this was such a big embarrassment to the UK that even the UK has admitted it. They said, quote, "There is a lot of lessons we can learn from this. This took years, and we need to cut that down to months." You need to know, though, that these military vehicles that arrived in the UK today are actually really important. They're used for gathering intelligence on the battlefield, seeing things that drones can't see. So without them, the UK and NATO is a bit screwed. The UK spoke on that. They said, quote, "Our mission is to support NATO allies, and in particular, we need to secure the eastern flank near Russia." However, something important, when they were 4 years late back in 2020, they were first brought in, but they had a few problems. Because they were so loud inside and there wasn't any noise cancelling, the soldiers inside actually started to get deaf from it. And now there's soldiers who were inside of these who are genuinely deafened now. Of course, that's been fixed now. First 50 have been delivered today, which is a another reason why they're so late, but they're still 8 years late. So really, this isn't a good look for the UK, and it's quite embarrassing. But either way, at least the military vehicles have now arrived, but they'll definitely be speeding it up in the future, I'm sure. But something else that NATO is doing as well, America just approved Ukraine to get Tomahawk cruise missiles, and this could drag NATO and the US into the war. Ukraine will be able to use these missiles to strike Moscow. But you need to remember though that Putin said if the US does this, they will mean that the US is involved in the war now. Now you should know though that Trump previously said, quote, "We don't want to be giving away things that we need to protect our own country." However, it's worth noting he's kind of jumped around on his position, because shortly after he said that, he said something different later. He said that he's going to be sending them to Ukraine. And because these missiles have been approved to be sent to Ukraine today, it means the final call is now with Trump. And if Trump wants to send them to Ukraine, then he is allowed to. So at the moment, we don't know categorically what's going to happen, but what we do know is that Ukraine has been approved to get the Tomahawk cruise missiles. Of course, it goes without saying that if Ukraine can directly strike Moscow with US missiles, then Russia just won't be very happy. And another reason why Russia is really annoyed over this is because Ukraine is unable to fire these missiles themselves. These missiles require you to put in the coordinates of its target that it's meant to hit, and the US are the only ones that can do that. And Russia's right. If the US enters the coordinates into these missiles for them to strike Russia, then it technically means that the US is bombing Russia. So this would mean the US is directly involved in the war, and it could drag them into the war. But I'm sure you've all heard about the people supporting Russia, and China being one of them. And today, China just unveiled a hypersonic bomber which can drop hypersonic missiles. And in comparison, the US doesn't even have hypersonic missiles. And something to note, this Chinese bomber can actually carry 4 of these hypersonic missiles, meaning that it will be almost impossible for a country to shoot all of them down. So they'd definitely get it. You do need to know though that this plane that China's unveiled today isn't a new plane. It's actually an old plane that's been revamped. Today, China upgraded it from the decades-old base model to something really quite advanced, which can now carry these 4 hypersonic missiles. But one of the reasons why this is such a big deal is because China didn't even speak on this themselves. Seemingly, they're trying to keep it a secret. In fact, the only reason we know about this is because of a video that came out of the bomber flying with the missiles attached to it. But one of the main things to know is that these hypersonic missiles themselves can travel over 2,000 kilometers. And that's really important because it means that the bomber can't be shot down, because it can fire the missiles really far away from the country it's actually attacking. And these missiles travel 10 times the speed of sound anyway, so they're pretty much impossible to intercept. At the moment, we don't have all the details on the bomber, but it's still quite a big deal because this is a new type of bomber which can also carry hypersonic missiles. But you might have realized this is my daily news recap where I summarize the most important news from the last 24 hours. And yeah, we do these videos every day. A lot of people would do them once a week. But tonight, America is going to war with Venezuela. So click here to watch that video and click here to subscribe so that you can see tomorrow's video where I'm sure something else will happen.